Thank you for downloading this RealAgriculture podcast. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 980 CGME and 650 CQM. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com, but it's great to be with you in this snow-covered Saskatchewan. Wow, there was some snow this week in the province. Incredible. Some areas saying, hey, we got more snow this week than we had all of last winter. So all of us, we had such a beautiful fall, and all of a sudden, turning on a dime, we've got winter out there and opportunities for doing maybe some sledding and and maybe getting a bit of a head start here on restocking some of that moisture for the 2025 crop. You can give me your opinions on that indeed. And speaking of your feedback, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Today on the program, we got lots of fun. We're going to be hearing from Josh Linville of StoneX. He's going to talk about the fundamentals of what's going on in the fertilizer market in Canada and in the U.S. So a bit of a North American perspective there because it all connects. It's a global market on fertilizer. We just can't talk about what the price is out our back door in the local market. We got to better understand it from a broader perspective, and Josh will provide some of that. We're also going to hear from one of your favorite locals. It is Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange to talk about what's going on in the cattle markets. And we're also going to discuss today a webinar that Real Agriculture is hosting in partnership with CAPI. It's going to happen on Wednesday. I'm going to tell you all about that at the back end of the show. It's a feature, a really important topic. We've had record signups for a CAPI and RealAg webinar so far, and we just released the details on Thursday. So you're not going to want to miss this. It is all about Canada's reaction to the U.S. election and Trump administration 2.0. But we'll talk about that more on the back end of the show. Earlier this week on the RealAg Radio podcast, I should say, every week we do a farmer rapid fire. Okay, and it's on Thursdays. And this week, joining us was Jim Wickett. He farms in Rosetown, Saskatchewan. And he gave us an update on how his crops were this year.
Oh, we're big Durham area, and those yields were, some of the best that the guys have ever had.
Okay.
But we're also a big lentil area, and those were some of the worst. Lots of zeros, single-digit stuff there. Just too wet in June for those crops. And then oilseeds were kind of right down the middle. There was some really good, some not quite as good, but by and large, everybody was pretty happy with that.
That was Jim Wickett of Rosetown, Saskatchewan on the RealAg Radio podcast for our Farmer Rapid Fire, which is brought to you by Pioneer Seeds Canada. So big thanks to them for being the sponsor of the Farmer Rapid Fire. And you can hear that every Thursday on the RealAg Radio podcast, where we talk to farmers across the country and find out how they're making it on their fields, their barns, and in their pastures. Also this week, I had a really cool time. I was out in Abbotsford, British Columbia for Farm Management Canada's AgEx Conference, and we hosted a live version of the RealAg Radio podcast. We talked about some of the current events that are happening. Of course, there was lots of questions about the U.S. election. What does it mean for Canada's trading relationship? There's a lot of dairy farmers in the Abbotsford area. It's interesting, just as you fly into Abbotsford, how different the geography is across Canada. And I really enjoy this. And, if you fly into a place like Heathrow in London, you can see the patchwork and how it's different, and the fields are shaped differently than we have in North America for the most part. But when you fly into Saskatchewan, it's this huge quilt, right, of patterns, and you notice the color, especially during the growing season. You see the flax and the canola and the cereals. when you fly into Abbotsford, you really realize how tight and just farming right up. You've got the mountains, and then you've got city, and you've got farmland, and how tight people are and confined in some really small spaces. Definitely showing some of the differences in the variety that we have in Canadian agriculture. Maybe we'll talk more about my trip out to AgEx at the back end of the show. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear about the fertilizer markets from Josh Linville of StoneX right after this.
For balanced nutrition with micronutrients, the best answer is Wolftrax DDP from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how Wolftrax can ensure nutrient availability through a crop's growth cycle, visit wolftrax.ca.
If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Since 2010, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has been helping farmers to grow great wheat. Covering everything from markets, the latest research, pest and disease control, all the way down to on-farm trials, the Wheat School has everything your crop needs. Check out our massive video library on YouTube and grow great wheat with the Wheat School, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains. Manage weeds early in your canola, cereals, and pulses with Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO powered by Duplasan technology, advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed burndown from New Farm.
We were talking about farm profitability and some of the concerns around it for the 2025 growing season in the last segment. Well, a part of that concern is fertilizer prices. And one of the North America's biggest, foremost experts when it comes to what's happening fundamentally in the fertilizer market is Josh Linville of StoneX. And I was able to catch up with him when I was at Kansas City for the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Conference, and we chatted about what's going on with the fertilizer market. Farmers are frustrated. It's sticky. What's going on?
They should be. You're right. Prices have been very sticky. Farm economics are not great. There's just not a lot of stuff to get excited about, especially after the last several years. When I look at the market today, I see kind of a quiet lull here for the next probably 30, 45 days, probably through the end of the year. I'm worried about some of the things playing out in Q1. There's some global issues I'm worried about. We're November 14th, and we barely turned a wheel here in the Midwest for fall application. That's starting to get me worried. So I think we'll enjoy this lull, but we better have our heads on a swivel and be ready to work, because come Jan 1, there's a lot of things starting to line up.
So is demand not, the poor economic situation from a profitability standpoint, is that not shaking demand at all to try to warrant these markets to drop a little bit on the fertilizer side?
On nitrogen and potash, no. Nitrogen, no. You've got to have the nitrogen in the soil to raise a crop. And we're still expecting 92 million acres of corn next year. Demand should be just as good as last year as it is this year. Potash, we don't expect any demand destruction because potash is really well priced. It's where it needs to be. Phosphate's the one we do think there's going to be some demand destruction, but our expectations of that destruction percentage is lowered because of a better crop out there. There's more bushels that they get to market, that's more nutrients removed from the soil. And any sort of destruction, I think, is going to be outshined by the tight supply situation. As long as we have the fall run that we think we're going to have, we're going to end this season in the U.S. very empty. Globally speaking, Chinese exports, we're fearing that those are going to be scaled back. India still has to rebuild their stockpiles. There's a lot of mouths to feed when it comes January, February.
Yeah. What are the hang-ups? What are the things that you're following right now where it's like, oh, this makes me a little bit queasy and uncomfortable?
The biggest one here at home today is, again, the fact that we haven't hardly turned a wheel. And there's a reason why we have a fall fertilizer run and a spring fertilizer run, because logistically we cannot do it all in one season.
Yeah.
Now, it's only the 14th. We can get this done. Last year we were going clear up until Christmas, and we could do that again this year. But anything past Thanksgiving is a gift. So you can't count on that. So that's what's going on here at home.
And haven't turned a wheel because it's been too warm.
It was too warm, too dry originally. Now it's too wet. Yesterday in Kansas City, it rained all day.
Yeah.
And it doesn't dry very much this time of year. You know, sun sets at 5:30. It's cooler out. You don't get the sun baking that moisture off the top of the field. So a rain today is going to keep that soil wet for a lot longer. We got another rain chance Sunday, Monday. It's going to hit a wide swath. You put one more rain in late next week or the week after, Thanksgiving week, and suddenly you're talking about December before you turn a wheel out there.
Right. Anything else on the concerning side of things?
Internationally, everybody's asking questions. What happens with the Trump administration? Is he going to rescind tariffs? Is he going to put on more tariffs? I am personally more worried that he is going to start butting heads with Putin over the Ukrainian invasion when he gets in, and his tool are tariffs. We already have tariffs as far as phosphate coming from Russia. Will he include potash? Will he include nitrogen? And then we got to worry about the Iran-Israel situation. Iran, people don't realize that. Iran exports of almost as much urea per year as China does. And Chinese exports are already almost non-existent. If we all of a sudden get into a situation where we lose Iran, we've lost 20% of the global export marketplace.
Why is the U.S. still buying potash from Russia when Canada's adjacent, key supplier of potash? Is it to keep the Canadians in check on pricing, or what's happening there?
I think there's a little bit of people want some of that, keeping them in check, a little bit more competition. But when you think about it, a lot of the where the potash is produced in Canada, there are some spots in the U.S. where it's better to bring a vessel from Russia, from the Black Sea, and hit, say, like the East Coast or someplace like that. So there's some regions where they're a little bit more competitive, but I think overall, people like the competition. Keep them honest.
I think one of the struggles, you just take Canadian potash out of the equation for a second. If you look at where a lot of fertilizer is produced in the world, it's in countries where you can argue there is at times not a very good relationship with the United States.
Absolutely. You talk about Russia, Ukraine situation. That's a problem. Russia's a major exporter. China, we keep talking about, are they going to invade Taiwan? They're a major exporter of phosphate and urea. Middle East in general. 1 out of every 2 tons of urea exported in the world comes from North Africa to the Middle East. So yeah, you're right. Tumultuous areas, and who knows what those relationships look like over the next 2 to 4 years.
Especially some of the tariff amounts that are being thrown around. Like we're not talking about 3, 4, 5%, 10, 20, 100. There was even a 200 on one discussion. And some of that is hyperbolic and it's campaigning. So we'll have to wait and see. But it's the amount. It's where it's not just the fact we have tariffs or going to have tariffs. It's the size of the tariff. I think that also is a larger concern than maybe it was, say, going back even in the first Trump administration.
Right, and when you've got a world that's oversupplied, you need a bigger tariff percentage to keep the product from coming. Look at phosphate. Morocco here for a while had a 2% tariff, and most people looked at it and said, "Oh, of course they're going to bring everything they can." Not a single ton. The reason being, Morocco's sitting there looking at that 2% tariff and saying, why would I pay that? I have got mouths around the world to feed. There is more than enough demand around the world to take care of the stuff I produce. You can take your 2% and shove it. I don't have to pay it. If nothing else, they're proving a point that I can survive without you more than you can survive without me.
One of the tariff discussions, and you and I were texting while I was touring the Nutrien potash mine. It was super cool. The pictures, everyone's just. I'm still amazed at how cool that trip was. But one of the things that came out of that discussion, 87% of the U.S. potash that is used comes from Canada, for example. And then I thought of the Trump tariffs. 10% on all products coming into the United States. Potash is one where you're like, oh yeah, that could never happen. I don't see is there any path where someone could justify putting a tariff on Canadian potash coming into the U.S. with how important that resource is?
I never want to say never. I don't think so. Yeah. But I would never say never.
People would be calling their congressman and their senator like it would be insane. It's actually hard to imagine, but anyway.
Yeah, I think if you really want to hack off every single farmer, what is there, 2 million farmers in the U.S. market, and then you think about their friends and their family, That'd be a really good way to lose a lot of the popular vote just from one move. So I don't think it happens, but I'm not going to sit there and say it wouldn't, because as soon as you do, the market's going to prove you wrong.
What I'm hearing from you, nitrogen prices are where they are and likely staying there.
Yeah. I think nitrogen probably stays steady here for the next 30, 45 days. A little bit of worry of what happens if we don't have this fall application run. What does that mean for springtime? But ultimately, globally, nitrogen, I'm fearful we're going to see a bullish trend as we move into Q1.
So you actually think that, so if people are out of the market right now, they're, hey, I'm going to wait till spring, maybe use my cash other places. You're thinking higher prices in the spring from now?
I am. I just, when I look around the world, and it's all built on the back of urea. Chinese exports are non-existent. That's usually 5 to 5.5 million ton exported. They've only exported 254,000 through September. You look at, the Russia situation, we could lose that. You look at the EU, the natural gas situation is getting worse, not better. We could lose more production out of Europe and create more demand that way. Egypt had production problems. Brazil has all their production problems because of high natural gas price. I've been asking people, think back to 21-22. Urea was $8,000, $9,000 a ton. I said, think about the supply situation then and think about today. Which was worse? And they can say, well, 21-22, we thought. And I was like, no, not what we thought. That's emotion. Fundamentally speaking, are we better or worse today or back then? Right. Most everybody I talk to thinks about it, and they're like, we're worse off today than we were back then. And our price of urea is a third of what it was.
I have to ask your colleague, Arlen Suderman at StoneX, about this, but I wonder if nitrogen stays where it is or goes a little bit higher. Do we see more of a consideration of people switching into beans?
Yeah, it's right now, the last time we ran through the numbers, we were still plugged in on 92 million acres of corn. But again, it's middle of November. A lot of things can change. And a lot of people are probably, there's no way we'll hit it. Listen, you can see prices change. You can see the market change. You can see everything change between now and then. You can see it happen 3 times. But as of today, we're still indicating 92 million acres, and that's a lot of nitrogen.
Well, we're at NAFB here in Kansas City, as we mentioned. One of my really underrated cities when it comes to restaurants, I think, in my opinion. I love coming to Kansas City. The most common question that I have had is, hey, what's with all the strikes you guys are having in Canada? What's the most common question that you're getting?
It's about the same thing. What does this mean? And what we've always been telling people, we saw this with the CP railroad strike. Yeah. We said, listen, it's incredibly important to Canada these rail lines run. It's more than likely the government's going to step in and say, listen, you've got to find common ground. You cannot shut down. They're going to force the hand. They did. Vancouver port strikes. The government intervened. I think the workers are figuring out, listen, we've got power. As a whole, we have power. We can put some pressure on them to get a little bit more of what we want. And when one group is able to do it, the rest of them see that and say, hey, if they can do it, why can't we? Yeah. So fortunately, we've not seen any real disruptions from logistics as far as moving ag, fertilizer, anything like that. But the more these things pop up, the more chance we have that one of them is going to stick.
What about the river situation? I was in Arkansas going back about a month ago. The river looked low. Has that changed at all?
It has. Fortunately, all this rain across the Midwest, draft restrictions because of low water levels have been lifted. Everything is back to normal. That doesn't mean that we could go dry again and see low levels. It could stay wet, and all of a sudden we're talking about flood situations again within 2, 3, 4 weeks. Right now, we're in a very good spot.
Awesome stuff. Hey, Josh, really appreciate it. You do great work at StoneX updating people on what's happening in the fertilizer markets. If somebody wants, you still sending out a newsletter?
Yeah. So if you go to Google StoneX Farmer Fertilizer Newsletter, still doing that once a month. The company made me start charging for it. It was a labor of love just because I felt like it really brought some value to the industry. The company was like, hey, you're spending our time, our money, do something. But registration there, StoneX Farmer Fertilizer Newsletter. Otherwise, go to stonex.com. You can find me there.
Well, I would say well worth the cost. And we always appreciate you giving us time and chatting about what's going on in the markets. All the best to you.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
That was Josh Linville of StoneX talking to me last week from Kansas City at the NAFB conference. Last week I put out a post on RealAgriculture.com talking about some of the cost savings that farmers are looking at making when it comes to 2025. One of the big concerns that farmers have is obviously commodity prices, input prices, and weather. When we looked at some of the areas of cost saving, farmers stated pretty clearly that they're less likely to be cutting fertilizer rates in order to save money on the 2025 crop. There's other areas that are looking to trim some of those costs. So hopefully some of Josh's information there on some of the fundamentals and what is happening in the market provides some opportunity for you to make a higher probability decision for success in 2025. We'll be following those fertilizer markets as the winter progresses. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more here of Real Ag on the weekend on 650 CKOM and 980 CJME. RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hepner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Invest in your farm's future by donating to the Acres for Education campaign. Your charitable donation will get students out of the classroom, giving them real-life experiences that will shape their views on agriculture. Learn more at aitc.sk.ca.
And welcome back to Real Ag on the weekend. It's now time to catch up what's going on in the cattle markets with Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange.
Well, a little bit better markets in the U.S. this week. We came off a little bit of a down over the last couple. But in the South, Texas, Kansas this week, we gained $1 back, so 186. And then in that Nebraska and the northern region, we call it 186, 187. That's 1 to 2 higher than last week. And 290 was their delivered trade, which is steady with last week. So a little bit better. And if the question is, well, why? We were on a bit of a downtrend, and how did we get this bounce? Certainly both in the U.S. and Canada, but from a U.S. perspective, packers have been running smaller fed cattle kills here in the last few weeks. And so that's put some pretty good support under that cutout. And so actually that choice cutout gained $3 this week. So it had dropped over the last few weeks. So it closed last night at 306.80. But again, that support and getting that support for the cutout gave us that support for the cash market. So that's kind of what happened there. The select spread, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, it's widened again to $34. That's not an all-time or anything, but it's out there. And again, just another confirmation, Shaun, about the demand for choice cuts and choice product, especially middle meats, as we head into the holiday season. And for the Canadian listeners, remember that next week we're heading into a holiday week, if you will, in the U.S. With Thanksgiving on Thursday. And so again, some good support as we go into the shorter production week next week.
Yeah, and we're also, what I was thinking too, the Canadian government announced the GST break, and a part of that is restaurants. And so that could be good for beef demand at restaurants in Canada as we go through the holidays.
Yeah. And again, going back, I don't know how many listeners, and if they didn't, they should go back and listen to your interview with Lance Zimmerman on beef demand and some of the pointers that some of the research they've done, or he's got his hands on in terms of what's going on at retail versus food service. And every little bit counts, but we're certainly holding our own. And this choice select spread just continues to confirm that demand for those high quality middle meats is just solid as heck, both at retail and food service.
Yeah. Kate, prices in Canada.
In Canada, we saw the local market in Alberta last night or yesterday, 405 to 408 delivered dressed. That's going to be called on the bottom end steady, on the top end +3. So again, a little bit of support there. That means when Canfax comes out with their average this afternoon, it should be around in the mid 240s, 245, 246. So that's, if somebody's wondering where the live market's at, that's kind of where we sit. Today is U.S. On feed report day. So this afternoon we'll get the November 1 report. So the guesses that would have come out earlier this week kind of set us up for what the trade is expecting, if you will, and what the futures market are kind of have priced in. So the guess for the report this afternoon, November 1 on feed, same as a year ago. October placements up 3 and marketing's up 5. So that's what's in the report. Now, here in Western Canada, Canfax does a report for us, and it comes out a week prior. So it was out last Friday. And just in a nutshell, we saw the same kind of trend. October placements were up in Western Canada. October marketings were up. But one difference is, and we've seen this all year long, our on-feed numbers are running below a year ago, whereas the U.S. is running even, we're running below. And again, just, I think, quantifying the whole tighter supply here in Western Canada as we go. The one kind of interesting point that I saw coming off of that report for Western Canada was we had a big increase in the number of yearling heifers, so grass heifers that got placed in October. And so it's a big number, but I think, again, it's just reminding us that this year the conditions were so much better. Grass conditions were so good. You could run those grass cattle until October. Whereas last year, they were long gone by now.
Yeah. Give us an update on the feeder market compared to this time last year.
Yeah, so we're winding down, of course, on the calf run. It's been a busy go, but, it's been tremendous in terms of record prices. But when the dust all settles, if you just take, what are we running at an average today the same week last year, our 5 to 6 weight steer calves are up $330 per head. And yearling steers, and these are just averages, are up $350 per head. So that's the year-over-year increase. If you were just selling cash cattle, feeder cattle, or calves this week versus the same week last year. So that's the kind of fall we've had. It's been incredible. And just a great way to kind of finish off this run.
I bet you there's a number of feeders that are looking at some of the destruction in the value of the Canadian dollar, and they're seeing that adds to the bottom line as well. No, we don't really know as far as how low this could go. You think back to the middle or the beginning of COVID, I think we dipped off 68 cents, so I guess we could use it a bit of a potential, but that decrease in the value is definitely going to help on those export numbers.
Yeah, lots of folks looking at that 70-cent mark, and we've got some really important interest rate decisions both in the U.S. and Canada, middle of December, so 11th and the 18th, I believe, are the two dates, respectively. And so depending on what those decisions are, certainly can play into what happens with our Canadian dollar vis-a-vis the U.S. And of course, as we roll into 2025, we're going to certainly be into a new administration, and what decisions are made there and economically could play into the dollar. But you're bang on. This weaker Canadian dollar has certainly supported Canadian cattle prices as we finish off the year.
Yeah, okay, we got about a minute left. What are some other data points that you want to bring up?
Well, I did want to, just because we're getting into the bread market right now. So bred cows and bred heifers, it looks like super demand, super interest. So we'll see prices are certainly starting off higher than last year. And I think the reason being, finally, of course, we've all been waiting for when is this bread market finally going to catch up with what's going on in the feeder market. And I would say to you, I think that's happening. Certainly buyers are seeing, they came through a great grass year. We've talked about that. They've got feed and now they've got the calf check in the bank, right? So all those things mean we're going to go back and buy. We might only need a few. We might need quite a few, depending on who you are and where you are. But I think there will be some great buying interest on this bread market as we finish the rest of the year too.
Overall, we just did our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index for October, and livestock producers definitely feeling better about some of their broadacre cropping peers. That is sure.
It's been a long time since you've seen that reversal, hasn't it?
Yes. No, absolutely. That's what I keep. I remember being at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference in August. And it was, the sentiment is it's about time, right? And I hear that on the Farmer Rapid Fire from some of the farmers across the country that have nothing to do with livestock. They'll say, it's about time. I got a cousin or I got a neighbor that's into ranching, and this is much needed. So I think there's a bit of a relief of a feeling there across the sector. And thanks so much for joining us here this week. Have yourself a great snowy weekend, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Shaun. You too.
We definitely saw this in our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index results for October. As Anne and I were talking about there, financially, the livestock sector, beef in particular, feeling a lot better about their current and future farm financial performance in comparison to people that just grow crops. That makes sense. The market has been good. The feed costs are lower because we've seen those commodity prices come down. So in one area of agriculture on the cropping side, very concerned about cropping or commodity prices. The other side of the equation, people in the livestock sector seeing some opportunities because those feed costs are lower than they were, say, 2, 3, 4 years ago, for sure. And again, Anne referenced my conversation with Lance Zimmerman from Rabobank. I encourage you to check that out at RealAgriculture.com. Lance does a great job of breaking down what is happening right now from a beef demand perspective. It really has prevailed. It has blown away a lot of predictions. Hey, a lot of people thought if we were going to be at these prices at the grocery store and at the restaurant, we would see a big time pullback when it comes to demand. And that has not been the case. It has just not happened the way that many predicted. Beef, again, really showing that it is highly desired by consumers. And we're still testing out what the maximum price point is for a lot of people in Canada and in the United States. Hey, we're going to take a break. We'll be back with more on RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
The next generation of Brandt U-Trough augers is here. They can move up to 9,000 bushels per hour, even in the harshest conditions. Visit your local Brandt dealer today.
Welcome back to RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. And hope you're having yourself a great weekend. Had a great show so far here today. Covered a lot of ground. Interesting stuff definitely there on the fertilizer market from Josh Linville. We've also heard from Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, about the cattle markets. Once again, I want to encourage you to go to realagriculture.com and check out my interview with Lance Zimmerman. He is with Rabobank. He is their cattle and beef analyst. Does great work. I had a chance to catch up with him in Kansas City, so you definitely want to check out that interview. Earlier this week, I was out at the AgEx, the Farm Management Canada Conference. A great conference. Now, I have traveled really across the country to different locations with this conference over the past 3-4 years. Heather Watson and her team do a fantastic job. If you have not, spent some time with some of the programming and the educational content that Farm Management Canada puts on, I highly encourage you to do so. Okay, they put on a great conference every year in November, but they also do a lot of other stuff throughout the year, really trying to raise that profile of farm management on farms. And listen, even if you're a one-person show, you don't have a whole team of employees, farm management is important. You got to manage, you got to fiscally manage, there's operational strategy, there's strategic planning, the higher level stuff, a lot of different stuff that happens. I encourage you to check that out. And if you are interested in farm management, you can also check out the Mind Your Farm Business podcast we produce at realagriculture.com, brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. Now, this week at the conference, it was in Abbotsford, BC. Very cool place. I really enjoyed my visit. There was a lot of farmers there, not only from across Canada, but a lot of them from the area around Abbotsford and Chilliwack. And I think oftentimes we kind of forget about British Columbia and the contribution that it makes to the agricultural, the economic impact of agriculture, right? There's a lot of dairies, there's poultry, there's vineyards. In fact, I think I mentioned this beginning of the show, 200 different commodities are produced in British Columbia. Farm management is definitely something that we need to continue to work on. And that's why I really love participating in that meeting every year. It's kind of forgotten. I know farmers, you love to learn about agronomy, animal husbandry, the production side of the equation, maybe even some marketing in there a little bit too when it comes to things like crop marketing, what's happening in the markets, trying to, make sure you maximize revenue as much as you can. But there's also the management side of the equation. And I think oftentimes that is it gets put a bit on the back burner. And at Real Agri Studies, our market research arm of Real Agriculture, we have found that in some of our research. When you look at learning and development, farmers are more inclined to want to learn about, production side, livestock production, crop marketing, not as much on the strategic planning, the operational efficiency, and human resources, finance, accounting. Those things are a little bit less. They're a little bit less in priority from a learning and development standpoint. So that's something we got to work on. I believe pretty firmly in that. We need to continue to try to raise the financial literacy of farmers across not only the province of Saskatchewan but across Canada for sure. One of the big questions that came out from AgEx this week, I had a lot of questions about what's going to happen with the election of Donald Trump. And the Trump, we're going to see a second version, Trump 2.0, as many people are calling it. We're going to have Trump 2.0 that's going to be inaugurated in early December. Early January, sorry about that, early January. And we're getting some of the cabinet that is being announced as of late. And one of those, is the USDA Ag Secretary. We heard an announcement yesterday on that, so we're going to be following up with that in the coming weeks for sure. But one of the big questions that Canadian farmers have to me all the time is what's going to happen on trade? What does this mean? And of course, we've got supply managed farmers that are very concerned, right? They're wondering, is the Trump administration going to come hard after supply management? And could we see this be maybe some cropping farmers have asked me, is this going to be the end of supply management? Well, those are all good questions. I think somewhere in the middle is probably the reality. Market access is going to be a thing, but don't be distracted by dairy. There's a lot of other topics that are going to be coming up here. Regulatory harmonization, biofuel policy, because the two countries do have some connection there. There's tax credits in the U.S. that Canadian farmers and processors would like to be able to take advantage of, even though they are not from the U.S. We've also got issues when it comes to digital taxes. We've got, of course, defense spending is going to be a big factor. So there's a lot of things that are going to come up in whatever we call this USMCA CUSMA renegotiation review or whatever have you, whatever label you want to put on it. It's going to be contentious. And what we've also seen here in the last week is Prime Minister Trudeau kind of following up on what we heard from Premier Ford out of Ontario that maybe Canada needs to think about some sort of a bilateral deal. Maybe we don't need a trilateral deal. Maybe we just need to work on something between Canada and the U.S., and maybe we don't need Mexico as much as maybe we did prior. This is a big change. This is a big, big change. This is something that Canada would not have said in 2018. No way. Now, it was Mexico in the last renegotiation that tried to do this, and Canada was kind of left out all of a sudden. Canada's got a bit of a long memory potentially on this, but I think it also shows how contentious the issues are between the U.S. and Mexico. Okay, Canada doesn't want to have anything to do with it. I think that's one way to look at it. And listen, you look at the U.S. election and how important that southern border for the U.S., the northern border for Mexico, how important that this undocumented worker, illegal immigrants, how important that issue is to the United States voting public. And they're basically asking President Trump, who's coming in, that the voters said the Biden administration didn't do enough, and they want the Trump administration to do something about it. And that's going to be a highly contentious issue with, low probability of ultimate, like a perfect outcome at the end of the day. Canada, again, separating itself from that issue. On Wednesday, this coming week, we're going to have a webinar, Real Agriculture and Cappy, in partnership, Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern. We've got a great lineup of guests, Jim Wiesmeyer from Pro Farmer, Megan Murdoch from Hill and Knowlton. We've also got Carlo Data of the Canada West Foundation, and we're going to be talking about what does the Canada-U.S. trade relationship look like going forward under Trump 2.0. So you can go to realagriculture.com and register for that, and if you can't find the link, make sure you email me, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag on the weekend. We'll chat again soon. Cheers, everybody.